Zombie apocalypse.
Hey everyone, especially to our research students who are currently conducting the research studies. As you notice, I decided to record this video. We don't have a sync meeting today, so that you can start or you can proceed working on your paper. So, uh, for this meeting, today, I'm going to present and discuss the contents of Chapter 3, which is the research design and methodology. Last time, we had a discussion, at the same time, presentation of the review of related literature in studies. Okay, wherein I discuss you each parts and the function on what are the things you're going to insert or present for each parts of the chapter. Now, the last part of the title defense presentation of title defense in your manuscript is the presentation of chapter 3. Okay, without further ado, I am going to show you the parts and the contents of this chapter. So here is our Google Classroom for ELT 38 Electronics Research and Design course. So the next topic after chapter 2 is the research design and methodology. So let me open and browse the learning materials that I posted here in our classroom. So this is chapter 3. Here is example of a sample research output presented by a student, okay, in Masteral, but same. It's also similar to the format of the undergraduate thesis or paper or manuscript. So here it is. So here, this is the simplest part of a research paper. Okay, it's not complicated as chapter 2. It consists of several parts. Okay, so here, as you can see, uh, chapter 3, which is the research design and methodology. Okay, this is the presentation of your paper of this, particularly on this part. So in this chapter, you're going to give us an introductory statement. Okay, what are the parts, the contents of this chapter? According here, so based on this sample that I gave you, it discusses the sources of data, the method that was used, including the respondents, the instrument, and the procedure on gathering the data with the aid of statistical tools in determining the correlation. This is based on the sample study. The title is about instructional effectiveness and academic profile of technical or TVL, technical vocational and livelihood teachers in Pilar Cluster, province of Sorsogon. I repeat, after you presented the chapter 3, including the search design and methodology, you're going to provide an introductory statement for this paper. This in most chapters, it should have an opening statement to guide the readers or even the panel members on the contents of your paper. Okay. To be followed by research method, sources of data, the respondents, including also or included in this paper are even the this is the respondents are going to identify who will be the subject of your study, or if you are conducting a qualitative research, the panel would like to know the key informants for your research undertaking. Okay, the research instrument and the data gathering procedures, and last is the statistical treatment used, and don't forget also to include the notes. So all around, now based on this paper, it contains uh, 10 or 15 pages, 10 I think, no, 52, 53, up to 55 or less than 10, uh, probably less than 10 is the content of the paper based on the given sample. So let us discuss each part of the chapter. So I repeat, chapter 3 is the simplest part of or yeah, part of the research paper, wherein it has several contents, including the research method, the sources of data used in the study, the number of respondents or who will be the respondents, and then instrumentation, procedures, statistical treatment, and notes. Okay, this is the proper or the organization of the contents of chapter 3. So again, as I've said, let us discuss what the details about chapter 3. So let's proceed back to the let's go back to the our Google Classroom. Let us first discuss what is research design and types of research design. Okay. But before that, let's first uh, try to understand the importance of this chapter. So, what is research design and method? Okay, based on my sample material. So first, I think some of you are confused or might ask this to me as your research professor. Sir Kenji, what do you think is the difference between a research design or to a research method? So here it is. When you say research design, it is a plan to answer your research question. How we're going to solve the problem based on your uh, um, uh, formulated research question. Okay, I repeat, when we say research design, it is a plan. But when we say research method, it is a strategy used to implement that plan. Okay? For emphasis, when we say research design, this pertains to a plan to answer your research question. While a research method is a strategy or a way on how you're going to use to implement the plan. Even though these are different class, they are somehow closely related because a good research design ensures the data you obtain will help you answer your research questions effectively. So here, I'll be showing you sample of a variety of research methods that you might use for your research study. But um, what I would like to emphasize is your research method that you're going to use depends on your research goal. When we say research goal, it depends on what subjects and who you want to study. For example, okay, you are interested in studying what makes people happy or why some students are more conscious about recycling on campus. To answer these questions, you need to make a decision about how you collect your data. I repeat, in identifying what research methods that you're going to use, it depends about the subject and who you want to study. So in order to answer these questions, you need to make a decision. Okay? Kung papaano ka magko-collect ng data. You want to know why students are more conscious about recycling on campus. Okay. Most frequently, these are the example methods. Okay. First is through observation or participant observation. Okay. Second, you may conduct survey. So you will prepare an instrument um, to and let the respondents or subject of the study answer it. And you're going to interpret the results of the survey. Third, to get to know more or to for better collection of data, you may conduct interviews to understand deeper the reason behind. Another method in conducting of in conducting or collecting data for your research is through focus group. You will select or identify a group of persons or people that will help you to conduct the study. You may prepare in a focus group. You may prepare it's quite a formal way of data collection or gathering data because you need a group of people. You will set a meeting. Uh, um, Usually, before during the face-to-face, you identify a place or probably in school or in a typical room wherein you invited selected persons to provide some inputs about your about the study, and then there is a moderator who will facilitate the focus group discussion. Okay, and there is a research guide questions for them to answer. Five, it could be experiments. Have the control group, for example, and the other group. Okay. For example, you want to come up with an instructional device intended for electronics course. You divided your group. Okay, one is the control group or one who will utilize the prototype for a specific lesson in electronics, and the other one are experimental, wherein no no wherein one will be using the prototype and the other one will not use the prototype uh, for instruction. Okay, we have the secondary data analysis or archival study or mixed methods or a combination of experiments and data analysis. So here, class, one particular method could be better suited to your research goal than others because the data you collect from different methods will be different in terms of quantity and quality. For example, surveys are usually designed to produce relatively short answers rather than extensive responses expected in qualitative interviews. Surveys are being used in quantitative research study because, as I've said, they they tend to produce short answers but concrete data. While in a qualitative, they resort to interviews to have or to gain extensive responses. So what other factors should I consider when choosing one method over another? Time for data collection and analysis is something you want to consider. Okay? As I've said, in research, time is of the essence. Time is really valuable. Okay? Our course is limited only for 2 SEMs. So this time, you need to plan by using your own research design and identify what method you're going to use in considering the time and how you're going to collect the information. For example, an observation or interview method, so-called qualitative approach, helps you collect richer, extensive data but the downside is it takes really time. Using a survey helps you collect more data quickly, yet it may lack details, but the data is accurate. So you will need to consider the time you have for research and the balance between strengths and weaknesses associated with each method. For example, qualitative and quantitative. So again, in research design and methodology, you have to discuss with your team, with your group, what type of research methods that you're going to adopt in in gathering your data, considering the time and other factors for your research. So that is how we define as well. We differentiate um, research design from a methodology. Okay. If you have questions about the definition of research design and methodology, you can message me anytime in our group chat, or if not, you can send message me through inbox or through my messenger. Okay, in order to address your concerns concerning on this material. Let us now proceed to the next material. Okay. Um, so let us dig deeper about research methods. So here, from scriber.com, let us, I'm going to present to you the research methods, definitions, types, and examples. Okay. Research methods are specific procedures for collecting or analyzing data. Developing your research methods is an integral part of your research design. I repeat, research method is an integral part for your research design. When planning your methods, you have to consider two things or two key decisions. First, decide, as what I've said a while ago, decide with your group or team or consult with your advisor how you're going to collect the data. The methods depend on what type of data you need to answer your research question. Okay? Is it a qualitative over quantitative? Will your data take the form of words or numbers? Is it a primary and secondary? Will you collect original data yourself, that is primary, or you will use data that has already been collected by someone else, and that is a secondary data? Is it descriptive or experimental? So usually in electronics technology, most of the students rely or use this kind of method, descriptive or experimental, or it could be descriptive with experimental research method. Meaning to say, will you, based on this statement or a question, will you take measurements of something as it is, or will you perform an experiment? After you plan or decided how you're going to collect the data, the second thing that you need to consider is how will you analyze? Or meaning to say, class, after you collected the data, how you're going to interpret the data. For example, for quantitative data, you can use statistical analysis. As I've said, a quantitative research method, uh, you should produce or you should gather accurate, systematic data. So you need statistical tools or statistical analysis methods to test relationships between variables. For example, you want to know if there is a significant relationship on the profile of, or what I say, the length of service to the performance of students, length of service of teachers to the performance of students when we talk about their learning outcome. So you need uh, 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 a deeper analysis using tools. Like for example, you're going to use correlation. Okay? While for a qualitative data, you can use methods such as thematic to interpret patterns and meanings in data. It's more on descriptive. Okay? Most of our students in electronics technology who are conducting research, they are more quantitative in nature. Only a few. I start as a research professor. I I I introduce the students to a different platform, or what I mean to a different type of research that they are conducting. Right? Data is the information that you collect for the purposes of answering your research question. The type of data you need depends on the aim of research. Okay, here's a short video clip about of defining research. It's either qualitative or quantitative. Okay, so let me show you.
Ready to get started on your research design? The first step is to define your research aims and choose the approach that best matches them. Let's dive right in. Hi, I'm Jessica from Scriber, here to help you achieve your academic goals. Before you can start designing your research, you should already have a clear idea of the research problem you want to investigate. Here's our example research problem. There has been a rapid rise in remote learning, but teachers don't know how to effectively adapt their lessons from in-person to online classes. There are many different aspects of this problem you could investigate. So first you need to figure out exactly what you aim to achieve. Based on your aims, you'll choose the approach that fits best. Qualitative or quantitative? Do you aim to make objective measurements and test hypotheses? Then take a quantitative approach. This type of research focuses on numbers and statistics. You might use it to systematically describe characteristics, averages, and patterns, investigate relationships between variables, test the effectiveness of a treatment, program, or product. For example, if your aim is to test the effectiveness of a new online teaching method, a quantitative approach is most suitable because it allows you to measure quantifiable learning outcomes like grades and test scores. Do you want to gain an in-depth understanding of experiences, beliefs, cultures, or ideas? Then take a qualitative approach. This type of approach focuses on words and ideas. You might use it to interpret and understand subjective experiences, give a rich account of a specific context, or explore an under-researched problem and generate ideas for future research. For example, if your aim is to explore exactly what students and teachers struggle with in remote classes and to generate new ideas for online teaching strategies, a qualitative approach would make the most sense. Qualitative and quantitative approaches tend to look quite different in their research process. Quantitative research is often associated with the deductive method. You start with a broad theory that's based on existing research, come up with a specific hypothesis, and test it using data. To do this scientifically, you need to carefully plan your research design and use systematic procedures to make sure your results are valid. Qualitative research is often associated with the inductive method. You start with the data, observe patterns in the data, and use your observations to develop theories or hypotheses. That means the research design is often more flexible and open to change as new ideas emerge from the data. To avoid bias, you need to reflect carefully on your own assumptions and interpretations. In reality, most research involves both deductive and inductive aspects, but understanding these concepts can help you more clearly define your aims. Do you want to objectively test an existing theory, or do you want to explore and develop new theories through your research? You can also choose to create a mixed method design, which incorporates aspects of both approaches. By combining qualitative and quantitative insights, You can gain a more complete picture of the problem you're studying and strengthen the credibility of your conclusions. There are several ways you might do this. Use qualitative research to develop hypotheses that you will then test using quantitative data. Use quantitative research to test hypotheses and then collect qualitative data that helps interpret and contextualize the results. Use both types to answer different sub-questions that relate to your research problem. Later in this playlist, I'll walk you through some of the specific methods and procedures you can use for each approach, so keep watching. Now, try to define your own research aims and decide which approach best matches them. Once you've done that, come find me in the next video. We'll take a look at the different types of design you can use for each of these approaches.
Excuse me, I off the audio. So as I've said, based on the video, it's up for you. It's either your study will focus on a qualitative or quantitative in approach of data collection. Depends on the type of knowledge that you want to develop. So that is the difference between a qualitative from a quantitative. So to sum up, these are the pros and cons of these two way of gathering data. If you want to develop a more mechanistic understanding of a topic, or for your research involves hypothesis testing, collect quantitative data. For questions about ideas, experiences, and meanings, or to study something that can't be described numerically, collect qualitative data. So in other words, when we say quantitative data, it's more on numbers. Okay, it's more on numbers and statistics. While qualitative, it's more on ideas, experiences, and meanings. This is how these two differs. In qualitative, it is flexible. You can opt based on the video. You can often adjust your methods as you go to develop new knowledge, and can be conducted with small samples. So, for example, your study is about the working students in BSET department under the new normal. Okay, so you can identify at least 5 students in electronics technology as your key informants for this study. Okay. The consequences or the cons of this data qualitative is it cannot be analyzed easily or statistically or generalized to broader populations. And in a qualitative data, as far as the standards is concerned, it's very difficult to standardize this type of research. So if we're going to proceed to quantitative data, this can be used to systematically describe large collection of things, like compared to qualitative, generates reproducible knowledge. The counterpart or the cons of this data gathering is it requires statistical training. So you need to read a lot of references or materials on statistics. How you're going to uh, uh, compute, how we're going to uh, collect and interpret or analyze the data. And the negative part of quantitative is it requires larger samples, unlike qualitative. Okay? So now let us differentiate primary from secondary data. Since we are done with qualitative and quanti. When we say primary data, it is an original information that you collect for the purposes of answering your research question. Primary data here in your study talks about, for example, are surveys, observation, and experiments. Okay. So the panel member will ask you during the title defense, what type of data that you use in planning of getting the information from the respondents. Okay, so maybe you will be using primary or data or primary sources. While secondary data class is information that has been already been collected by other researchers. Example, a government census or previous scientific studies. These are what we call secondary data. If you are exploring a novel research question, you'll probably need to collect primary data. When we say novel, it means original. But if you want to synthesize existing knowledge, analyze historical trends, or identify patterns on a large scale class, I think you might need to use a secondary data. So here are the advantage and disadvantage of primary and secondary. When you say primary, this can be collected to answer your specific research question. Second, you have control over the sampling and measurement methods because this is novel, this is new, this is original. The disadvantage of this, it is more expensive and time consuming to collect. It's true. And it requires training and on how you're going to collect the data. Next, the secondary. This is more easier. This is easier and faster to access. Another one is you can collect data that spans longer time scales and broader geographical locations. Its cons are no control over how data was generated, and it requires extra processing to make sure it works for your analysis. So how about let us another research method is what we call descriptive and experimental. Okay. In descriptive research, you're going to collect the data about your study subject without intervening. The validity of your research will depend on your sampling method. While in experimental type of research, you systematically intervene in a process and measure the outcome. The validity of research will depend on your experimental design. To conduct an experiment, you need to be able to vary your independent variable. Okay? Precisely measure dependent variable in control for confounding variables. If it's practically and ethically possible, this method is the best choice for answering questions about the cause and effect. So meaning to say, if you want to determine the cause and effect of a phenomenon or of an existing problem, you can use experimental method of research. Okay. The descriptive, it allows you to describe. So walang intervene. You have to, what you're going to do in using this method is to discuss or to describe the research subject without influencing. Second, it is accessible. You can gather more data on a larger scale. The consequence or the negative side of it is no control over confounding variables, and you cannot establish cause-effect relationships. Okay. While in experimental, there is more control over confounding variables and can establish cause and effect relationships. You might influence your research subject in unexpected ways, and it usually requires more expertise and resources to collect the data. So here's another video on examples of data collection methods. Okay, so here it is.
Data collection methods are ways of directly measuring variables and gathering information. They allow you to gain first-hand knowledge and original insights into your research problem. You can choose just one data collection method or several methods in the same study. Let's dive into a few of the most common choices and look at some concrete examples of how you can use different methods. Hi, I'm Jessica from Scribber, here to help you achieve your academic goals. Surveys allow you to collect data about opinions, behaviors, experiences, and demographic characteristics by asking people directly. There are two main survey methods to choose from. You can ask people to fill out questionnaires themselves, or conduct interviews where you ask questions and record the answers. Questionnaires are more common in quantitative research. They usually include closed questions with multiple choice answers or rating scales. This allows you to collect consistent data from many people and analyze the responses statistically. For example, if you want to measure student satisfaction with their online classes, you could use a questionnaire to collect responses from many students. Interviews are more common in qualitative research. They usually allow participants to answer questions in their own words. For example, you could conduct interviews to understand how teachers prepare for their online classes and explore which aspects they struggle with. Unlike with questionnaires, you can ask follow-up questions and explore ideas in more depth. However, interviewing is more time-consuming and involves a smaller group of participants. Observations allow you to collect data unobtrusively, observing characteristics, behaviors, or social interactions without relying on self-reporting. For example, to research teachers' skills in online teaching, you could observe their classes directly. Observations may be conducted in real time, taking notes as you observe, or you might make audio-visual recordings for later analysis. Quantitative observation involves systematically measuring or counting specific events, behaviors, characteristics, etc. With this method, it's important to have clear and objective rules to ensure you count the same thing consistently. For example, let's say you're collecting data on how often teachers have tech problems. Does an internet connection issue count, or will you only include problems that are within the teacher's control? You need to clearly define the categories and criteria of your observation in advance. Qualitative observation involves taking detailed notes and writing rich descriptions of what is observed. This means you don't have to decide in advance how to categorize your observations. For example, in an ethnographic study, you might take notes describing how students and teachers interact in the online environment. In theory, observations allow you to collect data on how people really behave and not just how they say they do. But keep in mind that being observed may make people behave differently than they normally would. There are many other data collection methods that are common in different fields. Here are a few examples. In media and communication, you might collect a sample of text to be analyzed. For example, speeches, articles, or social media posts. In psychology, you might use technologies like neuroimaging, eye tracking, or computer-based tasks to measure things like attention or reaction time. In education, you might use tests or assignments to collect data about knowledge and skills. In the physical sciences, you might use scientific instruments to measure things like weight, blood pressure, or chemical composition. But wait, what if you don't have the time or resources to collect data from the population you want to study? Instead of collecting your own data, you can use secondary data that other researchers already collected. For example, data sets from government surveys or previous studies on your topic. With this raw data, you can do your own analysis to answer new research questions that weren't addressed by the original study. Using secondary data gives you access to much larger and more varied samples that you could collect yourself. However, it also means that you don't have any control over which variables to measure or how to measure them, so the conclusions you can draw may be limited. Now here's a tip. If you're struggling to choose the best methods for your research, try reading relevant studies in your field to see how they went about it. Once you know which methods you want to use, you also need to plan out the details of how you use them. Join me in the next video to find out more.
Zombie apocalypse.